Hello everybody, my name is Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, and today I have for you a recording. The project today is drawing this glass of wine, so I hope you are all celebrating the holidays in a beautiful way. I thought today we would take some time to kind of slow down, take some time for ourselves to figure out this subject below us here. So if you're new to this series, we typically meet live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. I have a new subject each week designed to help us improve our artistic practice. So there's a particular challenge that we're all facing in each of these subjects. Today, the challenge is how do we capture the texture of this glass? Drawing a relatively simple subject like this glass can be very challenging because of that texture, because of the form. We really want to make this look right. Now, if you do want to follow along, you'll find a link to the reference image in the description below. You can also find a link to artistnetwork.com where you can share your work when you're done. So if you're joining us, welcome. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday for the next live event as well. If you've been with us for a while, I apologize that I can't be here with you live, but hopefully that this drawing will give you something to keep moving forward as an artist. So now, typically I do a drawing in advance to help wrap my head around the subject and make my instruction a little bit more clear, but I'm going into this a bit blind today. So I have not drawn this before. I don't draw still lifes like this very often, so let's see how it goes. Now I'm choosing to work in graphite today. If you want to work in charcoal or any other medium, you can certainly do that as well. So I have this soft graphite stick from Generals that I'll be using. I also have this 6B Generals pencil, this Kimberly, and this layout which is an extra black. And then I have this Prima white charcoal. I'm not sure if I'm going to use this, but I'm going to have this ready in case I want to use it for some of the lighter areas. Again, this is kind of an experiment, so let's just see how it goes. Blending stump, and I have a paper towel here that I'll be using to wipe things down. I'm going to adjust the exposure a little bit so it's not blown out. Erasers. We have, let's see, I have this extra soft Factus rubber eraser, and I have my Derwent retractable eraser. I love it. And you can see I have this shaved down into this chisel tip. That gives me a little bit more control and precision, as well as my Kneaded eraser that I've been using for quite a while. So handy to have all of these materials. But again, this isn't necessarily, draw like me. This is all about us drawing together. Let's see what we can learn by drawing this subject. Okay, so let's get to it. First, I'm going to kind of go through my overall process, but I also want to kind of point out that this is simply one way of working. I think it's important to kind of challenge ourselves again, and to learn to control the materials in new ways. What I like to do is kind of build up the whole drawing and kind of gradually move into the details. But a subject like this, I think it would be natural to want to really get in there and map out the drawing. And so if what I'm doing here is a little uncomfortable for you, just kind of blocking in this layer of graphite, then maybe hold out for just a little bit, and then I'll see if I can, give you some pointers that will move you in the right direction. So what I'm doing right now is just building up a layer of graphite, and while I'm doing that, I'm starting to think through kind of the general placement of the glass. You can see I've made these initial marks here. I'm just reacting to it very quickly. I'm looking at the screen in front of me where I see that small thumbnail of the glass of wine and making some initial observations, but I'm not doing a whole lot of calculating. And it may be a little uncomfortable for some of you because we look at this subject and it has these really nice sharp reflections and edges. Right, there's a clean quality to this reference image that would be very attractive, and there's part of me that is starting to think through that and getting really excited about drawing all those reflections. This is really messy, right? And sometimes it can feel intimidating to make a mess on the page and then try to sharpen it up. And like I said, this is a bit of an experiment. Every drawing is an experiment to some degree. I try to make each drawing something new for me. You know, it's a new subject, a new experiment. I can try to use the materials in a new way. I'm almost trying to imagine that there's part of this drawing process that where I feel like I've never drawn before. That's the kind of there's part of that mindset that I'm having run through the background of my mind right now, so that I can kind of capture that energy of, you know, that the newness of drawing. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but so right now I'm just kind of wrapping my head around the overall scene here, and I don't know as if I'm going to really adhere to the composition of the reference photo. You can see where the glass is offset to one side, so I might do that, but I might also move it in a little bit. The big thing right now is I want to start to think through now the placement of it. Now, one of the reasons I like to draw this way, you know, with a loose gesture, and this is not anything that's particularly revolutionary, but the way I conceive of it is that I'm just simply getting information on the paper. Very quickly I'm making statements about the subject that I'll then be able to react to, and I can make specific decisions with regards to the calculation. Now this is something that if you've discovered my book that I have out called See, Think, Draw, in that book it's kind of built on this idea that as artists we provide ourselves challenges so that we grow in particular ways. And I break down the process that I go through for completing a drawing in hopes that it will help you to develop your own process. So as I'm doing this, it may be something that you kind of sit back and observe, but say, well, it's not right for you, or there's parts of it that are right for you, but maybe you want to adapt, and because it's all about finding a way that you connect with the drawing process. So in the book, though, the way I break it down and the way I like to do that here in the show is to start with a gesture, layer on the calculations. You know, we're going to make some adjustments to the proportions, the placement, the composition, and then move into refinement. So there's kind of a flow that we go through, and that flow is designed to parallel the way in which we process information. So what I mean by that is when we glance at the reference photo, we very quickly come to the understanding that this is a glass of wine. In a split second, we can look at this and we understand it. There's a lot of calculation that's happening in the backgrounds of our minds that get us there. So we're interpreting the optical information. We're looking at the shapes of light and dark, the forms that are in front of us, and that our brain is processing all of that information and sending to our conscious mind an understanding that this is a glass of wine. So what we're doing throughout the drawing process, though, is we're kind of slowing everything down in our brains and really taking a close look at how we came to that understanding. You know, what is it about this shape and the form, about the value relationships, about the textures, the edges, etc., that allowed us to, in a split second, interpret this as a glass of wine. So with that in mind, it takes time to really discover that, and we want to have the drawing kind of express that as well. So this stage in the drawing aligns with where my brain is at this point, right? I have a very surface level understanding of the drawing, of the subject. I haven't taken time to really study all of the nuances, all the details and refinements, and so the drawing is kind of loose and unrefined. And then as we study the subject, we'll get to know it more deeply, and the drawing will reflect that as well. We'll really have taken time to study all of that. So I'm just kind of wiping this down, softening the edges, and what I like about this stage in the process is that it helps to prepare the surface for additional layers of information. I know that there's a highlight here, and I can kind of roughly leave that open. And the other reason that I'm choosing to work this way is that as I look at that subject, there are areas where the edges are very hard and clear, but then there's some areas where it's not, and it feels like it kind of disappears. And so I want to come at this drawing with a certain amount of delicacy in the marks, so that I can really kind of capture that. So I'm going to start with soft edges and gradually refine them and make them sharper. So now at this stage, let's start to map things out a little bit. So as I said earlier, you may want to do this stage first. I like to kind of set the ground a little bit by drawing this kind of loose gestural mass form here. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to first establish a kind of horizontal axis here that just represents the axis of that upper ellipse. And then I'm going to establish a vertical line that represents the central axis for the stem of the glass. Now, one of the ways I did that, one of the things you can do is, I don't know if you can see here on the side of the paper, but I have my fingernails kind of locked on the edge of the page here, and I'm using that as a guide. So if I lock my kind of pencil into my hand here, you can see I've extended it out to where I want to place that central axis. I kind of lock my wrist and my fingers, and then just slide it up and down that page. So I'm orienting the marks to the page itself. And then I also have this edge of the table, and this paper is squared to that edge. And so as I establish my horizontal axis, I can use this. I can feel it on my wrist, and I can use it as a way to evaluate the horizontal nature of that. But a lot of it, you can see I'm locking my wrist here, and that helps to stabilize the pencil. And by drawing from the shoulder, you can create straighter edges. Now I want to be very careful with this mark here, and you can see that I'm using the side of the pencil. It creates a relatively fine mark. I don't need something super fine, but I want to use the side of the pencil because then it floats on the paper a little bit more easily. I can erase that later if I don't want to show that mark. So again, I'm just kind of mapping things out here. So now, with that central axis in place, I can start to map out the shape of the glass. And as I look at the angles, I can do this is what's called angle sighting. So when I have the reference in front of me, I can close one eye to flatten my depth perception, hold my pencil up, targeting this slope here, so aligning the pencil with the slope directly above the reference photo, carrying it across and placing it on top of the drawing. So I'm looking in front of me and seeing what you're seeing on the screen. And that the drawing here is similar to me placing the drawing in front of me. So if you have that opportunity to have the drawing vertically in front of you and you're drawing next to one another, you can make these transitions very easily. So I'm just finding that angle of the glass there. And then I'll find the angle here, looking for a sense of symmetry here. Does this, let's see if I find the distance here, correlate with this? This might have to come out just a little bit. But you can see it's a relatively soft edge right now. We're going to gradually refine that. Now, what I'm going to look for now, you can see is I'm finding the average angle for this stretch of the glass, and I'm going to break that curve down into a series of shorter, straighter marks. And that's going to help me to arrive at a more precise curve. And now, so I'm now moving I did the top section here, moving down to the bottom section. And I'm just kind of visualizing what that curve might look like as a sequence of shorter, straighter marks. Now I'm going to find this distance here from the center to the edge. So measuring out from that center, so I'm just trying to make sure that they're equidistant. And that's one of the trickier parts. Like I said, this is a relatively simple subject, right? But it's also, there's a lot of complexity to it. And sometimes with an object that is relatively simple, there's not a lot of parts to it. The symmetry of an object like this becomes more kind of critical in that, you know, the fewer elements in a subject, the more important each element becomes with regards to kind of expressing the accuracy. So as I kind of measure down the stem here, kind of again using this as a guide, and I'm not using a straight edge because I don't want a really hard mark, but I'll gradually refine that, and if I need to I can bring a straight edge out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure down the length of the stem, and I'm going to use the height of the glass, the kind of cup portion of the glass as a reference. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find, since I have this mark here representing the center axis, this is going to be erased later because this actually spans the opening of the glass here. There's going to be an ellipse here, but I don't have that ready yet. I'm going to visualize that central axis, and I'm going to measure from here to here. So very similar to what we're just doing with angle sighting, I'm going to use what's called comparative measuring. Closing one eye to flatten my depth perception, I'm holding my pencil out directly on top of the reference image. I have one right over here, a larger one. Placing the end of the pencil with this part of the drawing, the axis of on the glass, sliding my finger down till it aligns with the bottom edge here where the stem initiates. And then I'm bringing that down. I'm taking this measurement and comparing it to the height here, from the base up into the cup. And so what I'm seeing in the reference image is that if I take this height here, carry this down from the base of the glass, it should place me approximately here. So I've actually got where I kind of initially put my gesture, I've established a proper relationship. So this height here is equivalent to the distance from the bottom of the glass up about, you know, a quarter of the way up, a little bit less than a quarter of the way into the wine there. Now you can see that I don't have a whole lot of space down here in when I compare it to the reference image, there's more space here. So I don't have a whole lot of space, so the question is, do I want to adjust it now? This could be a good spot for me to kind of wipe everything down and start over, bring the glass up, or make everything smaller. But before I do that, I don't know if I'm going to do that because that's just going to take a little bit longer, and I'm not sure if that's going to be necessary. It may lead to a drawing that's not as strong as it could be, but that's, like again, I want to, to help us make this more efficient, I'm going to kind of just move along, I think. But I just want to kind of point that out. If you find that this is going to run off the page or it gets really crowded down here, you may take some time to move it up. And you haven't committed a whole lot of time to the drawing yet, and so it's worth it to really focus on the placement of the glass right now. Before I do that, though, my next step is I want to compare the width here, the widest part, to the height, and see where I'm at right now. And what I observe, let's see, is if I take that measurement of the width, let's see, if I turn it this way, that puts me pretty close to where I need it to be. Let me see if I can kind of describe that. I can kind of rough in the line there of the wine. When I take this measurement at the widest part and I turn it vertically, placing this at the bottom of the stem, that distance should extend just above this line over here. And then if I compare that to this distance, it should put me down into this line here, so that part of the line. So I think I've actually got a pretty solid expression of the proportions there. Now, I'm going to have to kind of continually refine this, and as I look at this, there's a lot of complexity and subtlety to what happens here with the way the glass breaks up the light. It's not a nice, clean, sharp edge. There's a really interesting play between light and dark that I'm going to have to navigate. But for now, I'm going to keep it relatively simple. I'm going to kind of refine this edge just a little bit with an eraser, do some subtractive drawing. Now, when we get to the ellipses, and then that's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll kind of talk through how I'm thinking about that. Now, when I work with these curves with the ellipses, one of the things that's really critical is to measure this distance here and compare that to the height. Now, with the way perspective works, this glass is slightly below our eye level. The top portion of the glass is closer to eye level than this ellipse here, which is closer than here. So as we move from top to bottom, those ellipses become a bit more open. So this is a more open ellipse. This starts to get a little bit narrower, and then this gets narrower still. All right, so, and it can get tricky to kind of really evaluate that. But see if you can take some time to really observe that, and that will help you to really help you to dial in the correct proportions. All right, so I'm kind of squinting, just looking at the overall masses here. Using the side of the pencil, this helps me to fill in a broad area relatively quickly. But you can see how soft that the edges are. And I forgot to mention that this is a cotton rag paper that I'm working with. I believe this is the Stonehenge paper. As I'm doing this, I'm letting the pencil kind of rotate in my fingers to avoid flat spots. And the advantage here is you can see how sharp that point is. I want to preserve that sharp point for just a few kind of key areas. And now, one of the things that I think where I want to go now is I'm going to do some subtractive drawing with the eraser. So one of the advantages, again, to kind of toning the paper is that it provides me the opportunity to do some subtractive drawing. I talked earlier about these edges really being soft, and as I look at the reference photo, I can see that this edge of the glass is actually a light line against the darker background. There's a bit of a reflection that's catching it. So it's not a very hard edge at all. So rather than drawing a pencil line, I'm using the eraser to establish that edge. And this is really just a light touch because I don't want to lift too much. Kind of feathering away. I'm just sharpening the edges now. So I'm just using the weight of the eraser to lift up and then sharpen these edges. As I'm following the lines established on the page, I'm looking up at the larger reference image to really study the curve. And then I'm evaluating the drawing, looking at the drawing in front of me on the screen, looking at it here. And now I want to make sure that the symmetry is working, that it's a symmetrical form. So I'm going to take this measurement. Okay, so it is symmetrical, and this is where it's, for me at least, I noticed that my eyes play tricks on me. I feel like this is wider than it actually is, but I think it's actually correct. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser here to kind of pick off some. So I used the rubber eraser to sharpen that edge. Again, using a very light touch so that I'm not lifting off too much material. And if you need to refine that shape farther, you come in with the pencil and sharpen that up. But you can see how I'm not really drawing a line. I'm just moving from the center of the form up to the edge. I'm going to double check the symmetry again. I feel like this could come over a little bit more. And I can move down here. You can see that the stem here, how it catches the light. So it's light against that darker background there, and then you get a dark line the way the light is bending around through that cylinder of the stem. And if you want to bring out a straight edge, that can be helpful. You know, I'm choosing not to do that just because I kind of like the hand-drawn lines, and I feel like they're sharp enough. On the center of the form here, I'm going to lift off a little bit of that stem. I'm using the side of the kneaded eraser here. It's just a little bit more gentle. Let's see, now it's starting to get a little mottled here, a little blotchy. So I'm going to use the kneaded eraser to do that, and you can see some of the faint marks from the gesture still showing through, but I'm not worried about that. So I'm really just using the weight of the eraser, if not even, it's really light. I've actually got it supported with my pinky here to lift it off, so it's a very gentle mark. Again, this is a bit of an experiment for me. I haven't drawn this before, so I'm just kind of feeling my way out. And there's a chance that this whole thing could just fall apart. But that's why we're here practicing. Is kind of what makes it exciting is the idea that this may not come together. So just kind of smoothing things out along the edge of the glass there, erasing some of the overrun there with the top of the glass. Now, smooth out that area, and it's part of the drawing process to also tackle a subject, an area of the subject multiple times. So, don't be afraid to kind of wipe out an edge and then reestablish it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the opening of the glass here, and rather than try to hit that oval first, what I'm starting with is establishing the height of that opening, and noticing that there's a thin white line kind of across the front and the back, starting with the central areas here that are horizontal, and then kind of moving my way to the outer edges. Again, thinking about that symmetry. And I'm not worried about a sharp edge particularly. I'm really just trying to map things out a little bit. Because as I look closely at that, there's such intricate shapes around that edge. But if you let your eyes kind of lose focus, or if you squint at the subject, a lot of that intricacy goes away. And so I want to try to get that general shape first before I add any of the details. I'm going to try to smooth things out back in here a little bit. Now, one of the things I'm noticing is that the light is catching the paper a little bit differently in the camera than it is in front of me. So I'm trying to use the camera's view as my guide to observe kind of these spotches. So if I look in the camera, I see a little dark spot here, for example, but when I look at it in front of me here, I have a very hard time seeing it. And that's just the way the light is bouncing off the paper. So that may be something you're experiencing as well. I'm taking a little break from the glass right now to kind of work in some of the background using the charcoal stick, letting this just be soft. Okay, now back to this. Now that central axis seems to align with a bit of the reflection that I see in the glass. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to darken this a little bit. I'm going to darken that, and there's a bit of a reflection here. And that's leaving some of that reflection. And now I see in the reference photo that that's a relatively sharp edge. But I want to be careful not to use a line to define that edge. If I draw a line and I kind of outline that form, then it creates a division within the glass that could be difficult to remove later. What I want to focus on is really the volume of that glass first. And so I need to make sure that it feels like a three-dimensional form that then has these reflections kind of on it. Rather than, this appearing like a different shape. If I outline it, that's an indicator to the viewer's mind that line represents an edge, and that shape is actually a different object, and we don't want that. We want to make sure that reflection feels like it's part of the object. So being very careful with the edges here. Okay, so I will sharpen that up a little bit later, but I'm feeling pretty confident in the overall form here. So as I move down to the base of the glass, I'm kind of indicating the left and the right sides. They feel generally symmetrical. I'm going to indicate a mark down here for the bottom, and then kind of work my way out to the edges. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here because I would like to be able to rotate the paper, and I'm not able to do that right now because I have it taped down for the sake of the camera. So I'm going to just draw a little bit of these forms here on the glass. Again, trying to be very gentle, because with the way the reflections work, and it's kind of occurring to me that this is one of the real challenges and the opportunities to grow is in really taking time to understand the shapes that we're capable of seeing, that we're actually seeing. Because with a clear object like this, if we look down here, I think this is a really good example, we understand that disc-like form at the base. And that's something that my brain is really latching onto right now. But if I take time to really observe the shapes, and especially when I squint my eyes, you realize that it's all very, very subtle. There's not much that we can actually see. The shapes that we're seeing, the dark shapes that are actually more clear, are these darker forms in the center of this mass that are created by the light refracting through that surface. right? And so we know that overall form, but I'm trying to really just latch on to what I can actually see. What are those shapes? So for example, you can see that we understand that edge to exist, but if we were to cover this over, there's very little information. It's all very subtle. But when you add just a touch more info, then it becomes more clear. Our brain kind of makes sense of that. Okay, now I'm not particularly happy with the symmetry of this curve. So I'm going to continue to work it just really, really subtle. It doesn't take much to lift the graphite there. And I'm just looking at this to make sure it feels like it's a symmetrical form. And it's a little bit off, and this is where one of the challenges is that our brain is really good at observing that. And so we seem to be keenly aware of symmetry. And so take some time with that. Really, really study that in your own drawing. And this is where I think it's important to utilize that skill of the indirect gaze. So as I'm working on this section here on the left, I'm putting my awareness on the right. I'm kind of thinking both left and right at the same time. And hopefully that's more symmetrical. But what I'm observing when I compare it to the reference image is I didn't really get that shape right. I have it too rounded at the bottom. And I'm going to kind of correct it a little bit. But the question you can ask yourself is that important? Right? What's important to you? How close to the reference photo do you need it to be? Because there are certainly glasses that are, they're all different shapes. Now, as I move up this edge, it gets a little tricky because you can really see it in the reference photo. That edge is broken. We move from a dark edge here to then this light line that represents the edge right here. So I'm really just taking some time to kind of massage that edge there. Now you can really see how asymmetrical this is. Now that I've adjusted this shape, I feel like that is closer to the shape of the glass that I'm seeing. I need to adjust this accordingly. So I'm kind of moving in and out up to that edge, just using the weight of the eraser to shave the glass here, carving into it, doing this subtractive drawing. And then we see a similar situation here where there's a bit of what appears to be kind of an offset. We have that dark edge that transitions into a light edge here. So taking some time to kind of look up at the drawing, study it, see how it feels. That's feeling a little bit better. Kind of smooth that out a little bit. I'm going to target some of these darker blotches just with a light circular mark to smooth this out, because right now it's kind of the blotchiness is a little distracting. So one of the advantages to using the side of the pencil that I have, you can see how easily it lifts off. That's something that I hear from students frequently is that it's difficult sometimes to really correct mistakes. That those marks kind of stick to the paper too much, and that's one of the advantages to toning the page with a soft graphite first, is that it provides a layer that is a little bit easier to lift. Okay. I'm going to bring out the blending stump. And I am just going to kind of smooth this area out, thinking about the overall form. Now I'm observing that there's these reflections in here that I'll be lifting out. And then I'm going to use this to help kind of refine the opening here. Kind of adjust the curve. All right. Now as I look at the top there, I'm just going to target the darker patches. There's little dark reflections that get picked up in the rim. And this is where you can kind of use the natural curve of your wrist. Now that you have the basic shape of the ellipse mapped out, you can use that curve of your wrist to refine that. And then right in here, it gets darker. Where as the light really kind of bends, and there's more glass through which it's passing. So it's a relatively soft edge. But if you need something sharper, if you use this overhand grip, you start with the edge of the side of the graphite, and then as you need a sharper point, you just kind of roll your wrist up and engage the tip of the pencil a little bit more. And then this is where I'm going to really try to observe this shape in here. Kind of try to observe it as an abstract form, and don't force yourself to see edges and shapes that aren't there. So for example, I'm seeing these curves of light and dark, and here there's a really strong reflection. But then there's this kind of darker halo, and then it transitions into something darker into here. I'm kind of starting with that back edge of the wine. And then as I move through, let's see, I'm gonna move from the kind of the background layer into the front there. So now I'm going to refine this edge, try to describe where that edge is, but I'm going to use the side of the pencil. darken this whole thing actually. So this is requiring just a little bit more focus. Now, one of the things that happens to me a lot is, I talked a bit about it earlier with the value, is that when I kind of see things a little bit differently with the paper that's directly in front of me. And then when I look up at the screen and I can see the drawing vertically, I become aware of the aware of kind of mistakes or misstatements. Now, as I'm working here, one of the things that occurs to me as I look at the edge of the glass, it feels like it's a relatively sharp edge, but there are some subtle reflections that are happening right at the edge of that spherical form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the center of the form and work my way out. I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure here in the center, and as I come up to the edge, I'm going to lighten up the pressure but increase the precision. So it'll be a light but sharp edge. So again, using the broad side of the pencil, filling in this area as I get up to the edge, kind of slowing down the marks, and then rolling my wrist to use the tip of the pencil a little bit more to create a sharper edge but a lighter one. And as I move to the center of the glass, and I can really start to lay in the pressure, create darker marks. And that my hope there is that it kind of captures the quality of the edge a bit more effectively. If I make an edge that's too dark and sharp, it's possible that it'll kind of flatten out the form. So that's the thinking there. So if you have kind of a harder graphite pencil, maybe use that up along the edge and then a softer one for the center. As I build up these edges here, this edge here, it's kind of deceptive. It feels like it should be a hard, sharp edge, but it's actually relatively soft. Where it really sharpens up is right on along here. And then the same over on this side. I'm going to come back here now. I kind of have, that's kind of part of my process, is to be working on one area and then move to another. and then back. I kind of move all around. Again, just kind of a heavier pressure here in the center. As I work my way down, I see this slight reflection here. So again, I'm thinking a sharp edge, but a light mark as I move along this bottom edge. Okay. And there's a little bit of light kind of catching in some of this. I'm going to leave that a little unfinished. And I see there's a little dark reflection in here that I can play with. Very subtle. I see another one in here. Okay. And I think I can, actually I'm going to pull out the softer, the jet black graphite, see if I can go even darker. There we go, I like that. All right, now I'm going to come back to this last. I'm going to finish this stem, a little darker mark, dark and sharp here. And it kind of rolls into the center. There's a dark shape here at the stem. I'll sharpen that up. I'm going to adjust the symmetry a little bit as I observe it. It still doesn't quite feel symmetrical. So I'm going to keep massaging it until it feels right. Or close enough at least. If I look down here at the bottom, I'm just going to target the darker shapes, these little areas where the light is, where you get these dark reflections there. And then a little bit more clarity down in here. But it's all about being kind of delicate along this edge and almost trying to say as much as possible with as few marks as possible. Okay. And as we look here, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another pass along in here to add some darkness to the reflection. And now what I'm going to do is, actually, I'm going to bring this over a little bit. Kind of a sharper edge. I'm kind of enhancing that reflection a little bit here. And just a light touch, kind of washing over that background. And then what that does is it brings that reflection here, that light one, on top of that back edge. And I'm just using the weight of the eraser, actually kind of resisting it. It's such a light touch, trying to create a sharp edge. And actually I'm going to extend down into the wine. That reflection actually crosses over into the dark part of the glass where the wine is, and that helps to create that unity in that reflection, if that makes sense. So in this, I'm trying to think about some of the cross contour information, the idea that this shape in here really helps to describe the volume of the glass. And now I can lift off some of the reflections on this side here. There's seems to be reflecting some shapes in the room. Use this for a little bit sharper edge. And so as I'm lifting this with the eraser, I'm being careful to show some of the transparency. I'm not lifting off to the white of the paper. It's a very delicate kind of procedure there. and lifting off a little bit harder, where I want a brighter highlight, I can apply a little bit more pressure. And then I'm going to smooth this out, create a little contrast and texture. And then use that jet black to add a little bit more more clarity to this form here. So hopefully this makes sense. I hope you've enjoyed this series. If you do like what you're seeing here and you want to join us live, we'd love to have you. Again, we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We have a new subject every week designed specifically to challenge ourselves so that we grow in particular ways. So if you like what you see here, be sure to like the video, subscribe, set up notifications, all that fun stuff, so you can see when the next episode of Drawing Together comes out. But I think this is good for today. I might continue to work on it, but I'm not sure you're going to see me do much more than what I've already done. I'm just kind of continuing to tweak it here. So I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope you're drawing. Try to draw as much as you can. Draw for yourself as much as you need to. If you're kind of worried, just remember you don't have to show this to anybody. This can be purely for yourself. That's what we do sometimes as artists. We practice, we challenge ourselves, we have successes, we have failures. Everything's an opportunity to grow as an artist. So if you need to, if you can find somebody that you can bounce some of these ideas off with, that you can draw with, awesome. If you need, we're here for you and Drawing Together. So check out my book. The book is called See, Think, Draw. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble for pre-order. There you have it. Hope you have a happy new year, and I will see you at the next Drawing Together.